Some viewers may find this disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised.
Yes, I know I said Puppy in My Pocket would be next, and I'll get to it soon, but there were some things going on in the background, like my Vimeo account getting pulled, and it's a long and convoluted story that doesn't really matter here. Anyway, whatever happened to Spongebob, or Who Bob Wetpants? Yes, this episode is one of the two that I'm aware of that has two names. It's annoying, but Mystery with a Twistery is a lot more annoying in that regard. Bottom line, this episode needs to die. I'm just gonna put all my cards on the table. This episode has more problems than any other episode of the series. Now, that doesn't mean that I hate watching it the most. There are many episodes that I hate watching more. It doesn't mean it's the worst episode either. For example, Good Neighbors has many different problems, and The Splinter only really has one. But to most people, The Splinter is the worst episode by far. That being said, Who Bob Wetpants is still bottom 10 material. It's my most hated Season 5 episode. Yes, I hate it more than Atlantis Squarepants. Let's dig in! Speaking of Atlantis Squarepants, this episode starts with some weird patchy thing. I don't even know what you'd call this. It's like images of him telling us that it's a SpongeBob special? It's totally pointless, especially because we don't need Patchy to know that this is a SpongeBob special. And speaking of specials, this episode starts off a lot like The Best Day Ever, but with a kind of cruel twist. It starts with SpongeBob waking up extremely excited about the day he's about to have. In a very odd bit of foreshadowing, SpongeBob says hi to the mailman, which causes him to crash into a truck. I mean, there's an idea for a joke here, but it's just a guy talking to SpongeBob, so he gets hit by a truck. That's not funny. SpongeBob goes through a bunch of things he's going to do today, and we can already see that everyone hates him. One of the problems that you'll notice immediately about this episode is that it's very off-putting, and just incredibly mean-spirited. Normally in an episode like this, only one of the characters has an issue with SpongeBob, but since this is a special, they have to squeeze in every single character, and it all just piles into unpleasantness. And that's the best way to describe this special. It's just unpleasant. For some reason, Gary seems afraid of SpongeBob, which at this point in the series is kind of odd. I mean, Season 7 or Season 8 I totally understand, but this is Season 5, where we haven't had a Gary torture porn yet. Though SpongeBob did just accidentally cause someone to crash into a truck, but Gary didn't see that. Anyway, he squeezes Gary so hard that his shell bursts, and what we're left with is a grotesque blob. Funny, this isn't the first time that we've seen Gary without a shell, and it was never this gross before. SpongeBob gets chased out of his house and ends up running into Patrick. This knocks Patrick over and ends up destroying the cake he made for his mother that he spent all day baking. Season 5 is the season of off-screen birthdays. I don't know what I'm more confused by. The fact that Patrick was smart enough to bake a cake, the fact that he's doing it outside, or that he can actually recognize his mother this time. Angered, he calls SpongeBob Idiot Boy. Spoiler alert, this is going to happen with everyone, and I'll get to the problems with it as we go along. But it's structured all wrong. In this plot, being told off by the best friend is the straw that breaks the camel's back. SpongeBob should be told off by Patrick last, not first, which would make it the finishing blow, so to speak.
Ooh, that's the first time somebody's called me that.
No, it's not. Like, at all. People have called him idiots. Hell, people have called him worse. Blah 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 blah, episode order. This would be like if Mrs. Puff was actually surprised that SpongeBob failed his driving test on an average day of boating school. I don't know, maybe this whole thing would work better as a flashback, like a story being told of why SpongeBob is so important to Bikini Bottom. Just a thought. SpongeBob decides that Squidward would love his company, and he knocks on Squidward's door. Squidward starts scolding him, and back to the flashback idea. This is conveyed, as well as all the scoldings, like it's the first time that SpongeBob has ever been scolded. SpongeBob takes this uncharacteristically personally, which just feels completely off. What do I mean by this? Remember Good Neighbors, where Squidward repeatedly yelled at SpongeBob and Patrick, and they didn't get it through their thick skulls what was going on? That's how SpongeBob usually reacts to getting berated, and Good Neighbors is not the only example of this. On top of that, which makes this especially jarring, is that in other episodes, it's character flaws or purposeful actions that get him yelled at. Here, everyone yells at SpongeBob due to accidents, which just makes it excessively cruel, and opens absolutely no doors for a change in the character. Next, SpongeBob goes to Sandy and accidentally sprays water on her robot. By the way, Sandy has a big no shout, but it's shot all wrong. It's supposed to be simultaneous with the water. She only does it after the water lands on the robot. She also calls him Idiot Boy. Yes, everyone giving SpongeBob the exact same insult is horribly contrived. SpongeBob goes to work, where he proves to be even more incompetent than usual. This ends up getting Mr. Krabs to fall in the grease fryer. But what really gets him angry is his money burning in the fryer. His money acts like lovers because Mr. Krabs called them Mr. and Mrs. Dollar. There's an idea for a joke here, but it doesn't feel like they thought it out well enough. Mr. Krabs also calls SpongeBob Idiot Boy, And that's what breaks the camel's back. Like I said, it's structured all wrong. What's supposed to break the shell is the person closest to you, and it's not Mr. Krabs, even in this episode. Hell, in pretty much any episode. So SpongeBob starts crying like crazy, always a pleasant addition to any atrocity. The tears end up carrying him back to his house, where he packs up his stuff. After one final kick to SpongeBob's emotional crotch, he leaves a year's supply of snail food, and then he leaves. Since the house is also mad at SpongeBob for some reason, it once again just comes off as needlessly cruel and mean-spirited. So, SpongeBob decides to leave Bikini Bottom, which is actually a decent idea for a special episode. The last one that they've had in quite some time. Eventually, SpongeBob comes across Mongols? They cause him to run off a cliff and get knocked out. While he's presumably dying, we cut to Patrick knocking on SpongeBob's door. Like most specials where they feel like they can get away with extending shots, they do. Sandy comes up, and we learn that Patrick's been banging on the door for 3 hours.
I need his hot sauce for my milkshake.
But you've been drinking it. If you've been standing there for 3 hours, then the milkshake would be gone by now. Also, Sandy has literally no reason to be here. How this plot usually works is that she would feel guilty for snapping so hard. But we get nothing. No reason whatsoever. She just wants to go in because the plot demands it. They find that Gary has eaten the entire year's supply of snail food, and has become grotesque once more. They find SpongeBob's note, and this makes them feel guilty about what they did. Because they didn't realize the guilt of their own accord, it makes this turnaround feel extremely forced. We cut back to SpongeBob, who has finally woken up. However, all of a sudden, he seems to have amnesia. Yes, the most overused plot device in history. Amnesia is done so much because it has all the appeal of speculative fiction, but can literally be done in any series. Now, this isn't the worst display of amnesia that I've ever seen, but it is the most pointless. This amnesia will lead SpongeBob to thinking he can't do anything right, and the rest of his personality is completely the same, except maybe a little bit more flanderized. Here's the thing. SpongeBob already thought that he couldn't do anything right because of his friends' crushing scoldings. If SpongeBob didn't have amnesia, this plot would largely be the same. Hell, it would be even better, and I'll get to why. Some travelers tell SpongeBob that his name is Cheesehead, and he finds bubbles in his pocket. That gets these strangers to go off running in panic. And SpongeBob, yes, I'm gonna keep calling him SpongeBob, there's no reason not to. It's not like the character had any sort of change whatsoever. I mean, he talks a little bit more soft-spoken, but that's literally the only difference between him and SpongeBob. Then we get a news report. Apparently, Bikini Bottom has fallen into chaos. This is caused by the customers not getting their Krabby Patties because SpongeBob isn't there. No! You cannot do that! You cannot have SpongeBob constantly screwing up people's day, and yet have the entire town depend on him to function in the exact same episode. It's backhanded, and on top of that, it's just confusing. Also, Squidward and Mr. Krabs are surprisingly mean-spirited to each other. It feels like this dialogue and these interactions belong in an entirely different series. Now here's the really insulting part. They don't think they screwed up because they called SpongeBob Idiot Boy, but because SpongeBob is no longer providing the services that they like from him. In essence, they want the good without the bad, and you can't have that. They only show minuscule amounts of regret for driving SpongeBob out of town, which makes it really forced when they want him back. It takes more than one line of dialogue from each of them, especially when it's half-assed, compared to driving SpongeBob out of town. And then there's Squidward. He is absurdly unlikable here. Remember at the end of Home Sweet Rebel, where he's dancing on the foundation of SpongeBob's house? He's like that for the entirety of this episode, and he really doesn't get any consequences for it. Yeah, this is even worse than his little yellow book performance. Alright, back to New Kelp City. And you see how SpongeBob is walking facing away from the camera? If you know about this episode, then you know about the face he's gonna make. And it just keeps you completely on edge when you're watching. You know that it's coming, but you just don't know when and you don't know where. Anyway, the city people are assholes because city people. Look, it wasn't interesting in Town and Out, and it's definitely not interesting here.
Jobless deadbeat? What a sad existence I don't remember I lead.
Yep, back to where he was emotionally before he got amnesia. Once again, totally pointless. And SpongeBob is hungry, so he goes looking for a job. Once again, people are afraid of bubbles. It's definitely trying to build up to something, but we're over halfway done with this episode. And each time we cut to the other plot, the tension drops completely. After they build up the tension again, they drop it completely for, here it comes, worst expression of the whole fucking show. Whoever came up with that, go hurt yourself. For all the children you gave nightmares, please. Back to the other guys. Sandy has a machine that can track sponges.
It'll track any sponge within a 50-mile radius.
Oh, you're saying this thing can actually find SpongeBob?
The joke doesn't work because we already know that he doesn't want SpongeBob to be found.
This device was my last chance to get this place back into ship shape!
Yeah, he smashes it. I love it how the guy who needs SpongeBob the most doesn't realize what he did wrong. Yeah, Sandy and Patrick had a line of dialogue expressing some regret, Mr. Krabs, nada. He only wants SpongeBob back because he makes him money. Mr. Krabs tells Squidward to go find SpongeBob and threatens to fire him. Then he bribes Squidward with a Fabergé egg? Because it's worded like that, the episode forces you to think that Squidward can't have his job and the egg at the same time. So you begin expecting the episode to end with him homeless or something. Cutting back to SpongeBob, we have another mean-spirited joke towards the homeless. It's not funny, and you know what? It's kinda sick, because homeless people can't see this. It's like making a joke behind their back.
You guys mind if I bubble? But bubbles will steady the old nerves. Watch.
Okay, new rule of thumb. Anytime Bubbles is compared to smoking, it belongs in the bottom 10 episodes. It's not funny, and what surrounds it is absolutely horrible. And now I know that they've used that joke before. Also, if SpongeBob lost his memory, how does he know how he should feel about Bubbles? This bubble attracts some greaser ripoffs. Blah 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 wasted celebrity cameo. These are gangsters that hate Bubbles. That's all there is to it, really. It's kind of a letdown after all this half-ass build-up. Oh, how cute! Now to all the adult audience members, it looks like he's gonna cut SpongeBob up with a switchblade. Now we get the only entertaining part of the episode as SpongeBob uses his bubbles to fight them back. It's a decent climax. The problem is that it's actually too early for once. We're 15 minutes in out of 22 minutes. You want to start your climax at the latest possible point. And they don't. On a side note, they already did that sewer gag in a previous episode with Mr. Krabs' coin going down the drain. The bubble-popping boys get trapped in a bubble that they don't even try to pop, and they fly away. Overjoyed, everyone starts blowing bubbles. Then the Bikini Bottom mayor, who is also the mayor of New Kelp for some reason, makes SpongeBob the mayor. And you know what? If SpongeBob actually remembered what his friends said about him from before, it would be so much more satisfying. Seriously, that pointless amnesia pretty much shot your story in the head. Also, Patrick is smart enough to bake a cake, but isn't smart enough to recognize his best friend. The personality is not a joke. Seriously, this is really starting to piss me off. I'm surprised it took this long, but Patrick being stupid is not a joke. Squidward not liking SpongeBob is not a joke. Mr. Krabs being cheap is not a joke. Sandy being into science is not a joke. Stop treating them like jokes. Doing so is a one-way ticket to Flanderization, and the worst kind of places imaginable. We cut back to SpongeBob.
Don't know much about politics, or balanced budgets, or how to be a leader. I'm not exactly sure what a mayor is.
Wow, he's actually a perfect candidate for the job. When the gang tries to bring SpongeBob back, we get the final problem the amnesia brings us. Since SpongeBob doesn't remember being called Idiot Boy, they don't have to deal with what they actually did. Feeling guilty is not enough. They need to actually convince the SpongeBob that was wronged that they are sorry.
I found you?
No, surprised at seeing a talking weasel.
SpongeBob, sorry, Cheesehead. Mind filling me in? What's a weasel? Come on, guys, it's not that hard to think through your jokes and make sure that they make sense in the world that you've created.
Don't pretend you don't remember me, SpongeBob.
Sorry, Sandy.
Why do I get the feeling that was actually a climax in an earlier draft of this episode? Either way, that should have been what happened in the final draft. Squidward somehow steals the limo and drives them back all to Bikini Bottom.
Decorative egg, here I come.
Wow, talk about whiplash. With how overjoyed he was that SpongeBob was gone, a priceless artifact is not enough to make him want to bring SpongeBob back.
I was a fry cook before?
Hey, the best in the business.
You know, it wouldn't hurt to at least hint at past episodes. Oh, and even though SpongeBob is leaving, Mr. Krabs gives away an extremely valuable egg. Yep, totally out of character. Squidward trips, and the egg goes flying. And hey, they figured out how to sync up the no shout. And the egg shatters on top of SpongeBob. Oh, so the Fabergé egg was a fake, because a real jeweled egg probably wouldn't break so easily on impact. Gems are extremely hard. I mean, if it was made out of glass or ceramic, hell, if it was made out of chocolate, it would still be insulting, but at least it would have made sense. SpongeBob gets his memory back.
We're really sorry we ran you out of town, boy, but we're glad you're back.
Worst. However, SpongeBob still remembers being Cheesehead. Apparently, the bubble policy has ruined New Kelp City. This entire story was pointless. Thank you for your 22 minutes. Even in an episodic show like this one, at least one character should end up in a different place than they started. That's a general rule with any story. It doesn't have to be physical or anything. They can learn a lesson, but you have to end up somewhere new. I mean, come on, a hug. Show SpongeBob's friends appreciative that he's back. Give us some sort of payoff. Instead, they give us nothing. Yeah, this episode kinda sucks.